Hello. This video is about how to make a presentation. At least not a bad one, maybe even a good one. So to start things off, I have an example presentation that we're going to watch. As you go into this, a very important thing to think about, we're going to talk about it more afterwards, is this is an example of a presentation. This is not what we expect all presentations to look like. It is one way to do a presentation that I think we will all be able to agree at least was not bad. So we're going to talk a lot more after you watch this, but let's cut to that presentation. Hello. So this is our presentation, mass of a bucket of onions. I am Peter, and my lab mates are Peter and Petrus. So here's our project. So our project was to model the mass of a bucket filled with onions as a function of the number of onions in that bucket. Peter is now going to show you what that equipment looked like.
Yeah. Here's our setup. Up here we have a force sensor that talks to Logger Pro, and we have our bucket that's hanging from the force sensor. So this is recorded directly by Logger Pro, and that tells us the force that is hanging off the sensor. So that's a weight. So then by just dividing by gravity, we can get the mass of the bucket. And then, as we add onions to the bucket, that mass changes, and then we can get it. We also need to figure out the mass of the onions without the bucket. So what we did there is we actually just used the bag that the onions came in, and then weighed them each individually, and that's how we got our average. Let's switch back to that graph.
So this is the data we collected for the total mass of the system compared to the number of onions. And as you can see, it ended up being pretty linear. Petrus, do you want to talk about the analysis part?
Yeah. So we measured all of the onions and found that they had an average mass of 0.17 kilograms. And so we treated each onion as weighing the same amount. So as we added onions to the bucket, the mass went up by the same amount each time because all the onions have the same mass. So this is directly proportional, which is a linear relationship, as you saw in that graph. So this relationship shows that the mass increases in a linear way since each addition is the same magnitude. Mathematically, our model is that the total mass is equal to 0.17 times n, the number of onions, plus 0.38. The 0.17 is our mass of an average onion, and that 0.38 is the mass of the bucket in kilograms. And this agrees really well with the equation from Logger Pro, which said that it should be 0.168x plus 0.385. So that matches our empirical values really well. We had 0.17 as our average, and Logger Pro got 0.168. And we know that our bucket weighed 0.38, and Logger Pro thinks it should have weighed 0.385. So that seems to agree really well, the mathematical fit versus our empirical numbers. So in conclusion, we found that there's a linear relationship between the total mass of our system and the number of onions added. And that is a direct proportionality due to an initial offset because the bucket is not massless, so it doesn't start at zero. But that's okay because that's a systematic thing in our experiment, and we could account for that as we talked about in our analysis. So thank you.
Didn't those kids do a great job? Yeah, they deserve it. They tried. So let's talk about what you just watched. First, basic nuts and bolts. This was a 5 to 10 minute presentation where they told you what their project was, what the goals of that project were, what equipment they used and how they used it, what their data looked like, how they analyzed their data, what conclusions they could draw from that data, and then their final conclusions and summary. They did this with primarily a deck of slides. Now, slides are a very good medium to build a talk around because all of your equations are right there on the screen. There's no ambiguity about that math. All of your pictures are already there. There's no time that you need to draw things out. All right? It's concise. It follows a plan. Most of the time. A good set of slides does these things. But I bet we've all seen a bad set of slides before. So what makes a slide deck bad? Well, some things are obvious. If they're not organized, if they're hard to read, if you have to keep jumping back to old slides because you forgot to include things, that kind of stuff. And those are all easy things to find because you just have to practice. Practice your presentation. If you give your presentation and you find you need to keep jumping back, maybe that stuff should be on the front. Maybe it should be there where you're using it instead of jumping back. And you can figure that out with practice. That's also how you can guarantee you have a 5 to 10 minute talk. You practice your talk, you know how long it's going to be. What's the worst kind of slides? The worst kind of slides aren't the ones that are messy. They aren't the ones where you keep jumping around. They're the ones that are a book that someone put on a screen, and they are now reading that book to you. Why? You know, if it's all on the screen, then you don't need to say it out loud. So what was that talk in those slides? Let's take a look at them. In these slides, everything that is said is more or less there, but only the bones of it. The math is there, pictures are there, and then the presenter says most of the material. Your slides should be your notes. They should be your bare minimum framework. So if someone walks into the room and looks at your slides, they should be able to tell what's going on. But most of the material should be in what you're saying, not what's on the slides. So the fact that the person is talking to you is what makes it worthwhile. There are, of course, other ways to do talks than slides. We saw a little bit from that one where they took a video of what was going on. Right? You could take that further, right? If you wanted to, you could do this and talk into a camera and explain everything and put graphics and explosions and text scrolling across. But that's a lot. We don't expect you to do that. And frankly, explosions most of the time aren't needed. But if you think your message would be communicated well by talking directly into camera, that's fine. If you think it would work better by having a chalkboard and working things out on the chalkboard talking, that's fine too. All of those things, the medium of how that message gets across is negotiable. There are all kinds of variations there, and all of those things could change. But what really matters is the message. And there are some big structural things about the message we can talk about, right? Not about how to make clean slides, not about how you should write on slides, those kind of things. You don't need me explaining that to you. There's going to be a handout giving you some guidelines about that. This is the interesting bit. What is the message? How do you tell your story? Now, I know it sounds very highfalutin. What is the narrative arc of your presentation? That is exactly what we have to talk about. What is the narrative arc of your presentation? What is the story you're trying to tell? For a lot of our lectures here, that ends up being almost historical. What is the history of quantum mechanics? Or it could be very pedagogical. I need to teach you this and this, so I can teach you this, so I can teach you this, so I can teach you this. And we're building. That building is your narrative arc. For something like these presentations, the narrative arc is kind of what I did this week. I was given this project. This is how we got ready to perform it. This is how we performed it. This is how we took that data, how we analyzed that data, what we got out of that data. Narrative arc, what I did this week. And that's great. That is great for this kind of presentation, where it's very much a linear story. It doesn't have to be linear. There are ways to tell this non-linearly, but you don't need to really try. You're not pushing the envelopes here. You're not going to get bonus points because you made the memento of this, where it's non-linear storytelling and you're not sure what's going on and there's a big reveal at the end and wow. You don't need to be Christopher Nolan here, right? This is straightforward storytelling. I did A, which allowed me to do B, which allowed me to do C, which got us to final conclusions. Narrative arc, though. What are you trying to tell us? Does this slide, does this picture, does this anecdote help the narrative arc? Does it make my story better if I include this information? Will my story make more sense if this is there? Will it make more sense if this isn't there? These are the kinds of things you need to be thinking about as you're making your presentation. Two big things that I cannot stress enough as you are making your presentations. One, this is a learned skill. No one is born as a great storyteller. Filmmakers, actors, novelists, songwriters. Everyone was bad when they started this. This is a skill that you need to work on, which is why I am asking you to work on it. And we want you to be better at these. And we want you to be more comfortable at this the next time you do it. It's going to be an iterative process, building these skills of how to tell a good story, how to make a good slide deck, how to write a good report. None of these are abilities people are born with. And the second thing, this is not supposed to be high pressure. This is not supposed to be stressing you out. We are not here to make you nervous, to put you out of your comfort zone. Well, that's such a loaded phrase. We're here to make you stretch and to try new things, but we're not here to make you uncomfortable. This should be fun. This should be enjoyable. I'm not saying this shouldn't be work. This is not supposed to be stressful. This is not supposed to be nerve-wracking. But it's also not supposed to be easy. You're supposed to be putting work in. So, more than anything here, as you can see, we put a lot of thought into how we teach. And I think that's true of any good storyteller. There should be a lot of thought put into this and why you are choosing to do the things you're doing. And I know that makes this sound like a big, fancy thing. And I think if this is something you like, eventually it could be. You could take this to a place where it is honed to that kind of an art, that you are a professional educator, you are a professional storyteller. But even if that's not where you end up, these are skills that you should have. Because maybe you're not going to teach lectures for a living, but you need to convince your boss that you're worth it. You need to convince your manager that your idea is interesting enough you should do it. that the company should invest resources in you. You should be able to convince people that you are worth their time. And those are the same skills. This ability to communicate, I think, is vital for everyone. Even if you're not making videos, even if you're not teaching classes, the ability to have this back and forth is going to be very important. And so we want this to be a chance for you to stretch, to work, to practice. I am really, really looking forward to seeing what your presentations are and seeing the kinds of things that you create. I'm sure I'm going to be proud of you. Well, I'm sure I'm going to be proud at most of you. And if you happen to be one of the ones I'm not proud at, you did something to deserve that. But anyway, yeah, I really look forward to seeing these presentations. Thanks.